welcome back to your last day here at ISM 2017. I'm delighted to be here. Thanks so much to the association and, of course, to all of the people behind the scenes here. We know how much work goes in to something like this. I hope you've had a fruitful week so far. I'm especially excited to talk to you about curiosity today, and I'm going to call it a superpower. And we know now that the world needs a superpower more than ever. We know that 8 in 10 Americans recently told CNN that they feel that we're more polarized on key issues than at any other time in our nation's history. We know that the average onset of clinical depression is age 14, and that more women in their 40s and 50s are on antidepressants than any other time. We are also, as workers, taking fewer vacation days than ever before. And we know with terrible things like what just happened in Manchester, those are too common. We need a superpower. Humanity needs a superpower. So I'm going to talk to you this morning about curiosity, because I feel that curiosity can be that superpower for us, and we can get to a place where this is really closer to a true magic kingdom. So I'm going to talk you through 3 reasons why we need curiosity. I'm going to talk through where did it go? What happened to it? And hopefully there's some kids in the audience today. We invited children to come along today because we know that we once had curiosity, and then as we get older, it somehow disappears on us. And then finally, I'm going to give some real tangible ways to get curiosity back in our personal and professional lives. So here are the 3 reasons I think we need curiosity in our lives. I think curiosity can make us smarter. Curiosity can break down walls, and curiosity can bring value to the journey and not just the destination. So, how does curiosity make us smarter? We know that with questioning and curiosity, it actually illuminates the limbic system in our brains. It actually sees it as a reward. And we know that educators have long used curiosity, questioning, as a way to teach, and a way that actually helps students retain information better. It becomes stickier in our brains when we use curiosity as our guide. As ML mentioned, we have to stay curious in order to stay relevant in today's fast-paced business environment. Leadership guru Michael Hyatt says that the minute we stop being curious is the minute we start becoming irrelevant. There's another author, Daniel Pink. He wrote a book called A Whole New Mind, Why Right-Brainers Will Rule the World. And he quotes a study of 10 years of labor data, and the jobs that had the most growth over that time period are the positions that involved curiosity, questioning, creativity, and imagination. So curiosity can help us stay relevant in this job market and these changing professional times. So besides making us smarter and igniting our brain in a different way, curiosity can help break down walls and build empathy. We know that while sympathy is feelings for someone, empathy is feelings with someone. And it's only truly through empathy that we can relate to others in a more meaningful way. There's a great quote here from To Kill a Mockingbird. You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it. And we can't do that without curiosity, because when we're engaged with defensiveness or being rooted in our point of view, it locks down our brains from actually being curious about one another. It helps us suspend judgment. Our brains work really quickly. I'm going to talk about this in a little bit. Our brains work really quickly to make sense of our environment, and that means it's making snap judgments all the time. And it's only through curiosity that we can slow down that process and add reason to some of those judgments. I also feel that curiosity keeps us from stagnating. I already talked about that professionally, but think about personally. Think about in long-term relationships. Like, I'm 20 years married this year. Any long-time marrieds in the audience? Congratulations. We have to stay curious about our spouses, right? It's a marathon, not a sprint. So we need to keep questioning and keep learning about our spouses. I also have a 17-year-old at home. Any parents of teenagers? Peace be with you. So we need to stay curious about our teenagers and about our kids, right? And not take them for granted because we know them so well. So curiosity helps us stay engaged in that process of learning about other people. There's also, in your mobile app, under my profile, I've listed a few other really good videos I'm going to talk about today. I don't have time to show all of them to you, but check them out. There's one in there from Brene Brown about the difference between sympathy and empathy, and I think it's really powerful. So check that out when you have a chance. So curiosity makes us smarter. Curiosity breaks down walls. And third, curiosity brings value. Oh, I forgot, I'm going to give you a chance to actually try this out right now. I was going to do this a little later, but I thought I'd get you up and moving. One way that we can demonstrate curiosity in a real tangible way is just getting to know each other a little bit differently. Usually when we come to professional settings like this, we say, hi, I'm Annette Gregg, and I'm this, and I work for that. Well, it's okay to do that with your partner, but I'd also like you to ask them one more question. If I really knew you, what would I know? So I'd like you to we're just going to take a few minutes for that right now, and then so take a look back up here. When I raise my hand, we're going to cut that off, and I'm going to continue on through the presentation. But please introduce yourself to the person on either side of you, and have them say to you, if you really know me, you'd know X. Okay? Take some time doing that. I know it's going to be tough bringing everybody back from this one, I know. All right, come on back, everybody. So raise your hand if you were a little surprised by something you found out about the person next to you. There you go. So much more fun than just name, rank, and serial number. I've used that exercise with teams. I've used it with social groups, icebreakers at dinner parties. So it's just an example of how we need to stay a little more curious about even the people in our general vicinity, especially in work environments where we tend to categorize people just in a certain way. So I mentioned curiosity makes us smarter. Curiosity breaks down walls and really adds a level of depth to relationships. And third, why I feel curiosity is a superpower is that it can add value to the journey and not just the destination. I love this quote by Walt Disney. We keep moving forward, opening new doors, and doing things because we're curious. And curiosity keeps leading us down new paths. I think the art of exploration and of wonder can be lost in this fast-paced world we're in. Whether we're teaching our kids how to get to the right answer or we're managing teams to just get it done, we lose that art of exploration, and we actually shortcut the process where we might get a better answer, a better outcome, if we took a little bit more time and asked a few more questions. especially in a field like all of you are in, supply chain management, procurement, purchasing. It's probably very data-driven. So we need to continue to layer on the intellectual process and the reason on top of all that data to give it a true look. I think the more overworked we are, the more under-resourced we are, curiosity becomes sacrificed. So those 3 reasons are why I feel that it's a true superpower. So what happened? What happened to this little guy in the backyard that was looking at bugs? And how do we get him back? So where did curiosity go? I think if I asked you, probably the number 1 reason is I don't have time. I don't have time to be curious. You know what? I'll reinvent that process next year. Or I'll let the next team reinvent that process. I don't have the money to reinvent something, right? I'm lacking time, resources of some kind. I don't have the manpower. I don't have a big enough team. I think another thing that counteracts curiosity is society. I think that society likes decisiveness. And we're going to talk about that a little bit later. Our vision of a strong leader is someone that is decisive and comes up with a quick response. It's better to seem certain. It comes across as more powerful. I think sometimes we're not curious because we have a setting that we're in that's heavily reliant on process or routine. Or we might have a boss or a manager that doesn't appreciate curiosity and just wants you to get it done. The setting we're in might not really help us grow the curiosity muscle. If we were to be honest with ourselves, we might not be that curious because we're a little too self-absorbed. We might ask people how their weekend was, but we don't want the long story to that. We just want it was fine, because I got stuff to do. So I'd love to have time for that, but we're not as curious because we just have our own stuff going on. I think fear is a big one that undermines curiosity. Fear of the unknown. I can't get a new job because what if I fail? I can't reinvent myself. What if it doesn't work? What if my new boss is worse than my current boss? I've got this one down. What if I don't understand the new thing? It can be scary. If we're someone who likes routine, curiosity can be scary and pushes us out of that comfort zone. Curiosity also means that we might not know the answer all the time, and we might have a fear of looking dumb or asking too many questions. But if I were to say curiosity is a superpower, I'd say the kryptonite to curiosity is unconscious or hidden bias. So this is a real dictionary definition up here of hidden bias, but in general what it is the brain making snap judgments based on its interpretation of data. It is everywhere. We all have it, we are all biased, and it influences every decision we make of every day. And because the brain's number 1 job is to keep us safe, this kind of bias isn't necessarily evil at its core. We've all heard of fight or flight. This sorting process is actually necessary. The brain's processing stimuli, and it's saying, okay, that's good or that's bad. It happens in the amygdala, it happens instantaneously. But where it gets dangerous is where we take that snap judgment and we put it across a wide path. So for example, if you got snapped at by a dog when you were 5, as an adult, you might feel that all dogs are scary, right? That's just your brain saying, hey, stay away from dogs, because it's taking that bit of information that happened way back when, and it's layering over a memory, and it's categorizing it as dangerous. Now we know that all dogs are not bad, right? Especially the cute little fluffy ones. They're not all gonna bite you. But unless we slow that down, those irrational fears down, that sorting process, and add the layer of reason or curiosity, we're not gonna question some of these snap judgments. The brain makes us hardwired toward people that look and feel just like us, that have similar interests. And you can imagine how that can lead to stereotyping and prejudice, right? And of course, it can lend to a very big lack of diversity in the worlds around us. We need to go deeper. And again, we need to ask more questions. We need to layer on reason to some of these immediate assumptions we're making. Let me give you an example. So my university was Berkeley. Any Cal Bears in the audience? No Go Bears? Okay. So it's all right. We'll talk in the break. So here's one of my earliest, now that I've studied what hidden bias is or unconscious bias, one of my earliest recollections of this for me in my personal life was my first year at Berkeley. So my first roommate, brilliant 18-year-old engineering student from India who was in an arranged marriage. And I thought, here we are at Berkeley, the bastion of free thought, and I couldn't believe that this young lady who was so smart, had her whole life ahead of her, would agree to being in an arranged marriage. And I talked to her at length about how she should go home and tell her parents how this was something she would not agree to. Finally, a chance to stand up for herself. But she told me, after many hours talking through this, that this was a culture that she's from, that they spent many, many years finding a perfect family match for her, that they cared about her and her betrothed deeply, and this is how they did it in her culture. And actually, romantic love came later. And incidentally, they're still happily married today. But that was my bias of what a Western marriage should look like, or what romantic love should look like. I meant well, but until I got to know her and her culture, I had my own predisposition about that. So we do it all the time. So let's talk about how this lends to a big imbalance in today's business. We know of the Fortune 500 CEOs, only 1% are black. Only 4% of women are women, and not one of Fortune 500 CEOs is openly gay. Although less than 15% of American men are over 6 feet tall, over 60% of corporate CEOs are 6 feet tall. So in our minds, we have our brain telling us that this is what a leader should look like. And this is subconscious. There obviously is overt bias in the workplace, but you pair that with the unconscious bias, it's an uphill climb. Harvard took it deeper. Harvard's implicit association test is actually something you can take yourself. It's really, really fascinating. But they looked into the inherent biases that we all have, and they found that 70% of biases are directed toward people of color, the elderly, the disabled, and overweight people. So 70% of all of our subconscious bias is against those 4 people groups. Specifically, looking at the data on your screen here, I thought this was fascinating. Harvard's researchers found that 76% of people tested more readily associated males with career and females with family. 70% more readily associated male with science and females with art. 75% had an implicit preference over white people than black people, or for white people over black people. And finally, 76% have an implicit preference for able-bodied people. So that's why there's a diversity issue. Our brain's doing it. And until we slow it down and apply programs and education about this, it's going to continue happening. There, in fact, are more than 150 types of hidden bias. And I'm not going to bother you with all of them today. I'm going to talk about a few more that are really, really common, and we do it all the time. I see it all the time and when I work with companies. Think about fit. When you hire someone for fit, oh, they just don't fit with our team. They weren't a good fit. Or for your company. That's actually called affinity bias. It means we are geared toward, we're drawn to people that look like us or that have similar interests. Doesn't necessarily mean it's the best person for the job, though, right? We might have a lack of diversity if we only pick people that fit with us. There's something called confirmation bias, where you are hearing what you want to hear. You have in your mind what the right answer is, and the discussion's going on, and when you hear a key word, then that becomes all you've heard, because it confirms something that you were already believing. How about jumping on the bandwagon? You're sitting in a discussion, everybody starts agreeing with the boss because they're afraid not to. Well, that's called groupthink. We need to make sure that there is a place for everyone to be heard, even dissenting opinions. And finally, perception bias or stereotyping, feeling that a whole group of people is a certain way because of our one encounter. Say, Republicans versus Democrats, maybe, or Christians versus Muslims. We take one people group and think they are all that way. That's perception bias. So we have to teach our kids about these things, right? We have to teach our teams about these things. We need to talk openly with our neighbors about how we might all be falling prey to this kind of unconscious bias. So I'm going to give you some tips now on how to get our curiosity back. How do we become tinkerers again and working it out? The first idea I'm going to give you is from author Mark Barden, who wrote a book called A Beautiful Constraint. And he talks about a can-if mentality. When we're stressed or resource constrained, we say, oh, I can't because X. But Mark Barden's frame is, what if we said, I can if? What if we reframe that discussion to say, I can if? That actually puts us into a place of solutions versus scarcity. So give that a try in your team meetings. It's actually worked fairly well. The second idea I have for you today to get curiosity, to build your curiosity muscle back up, is to diversify your community. And I don't just mean traveling and exploring other cultures, although that's one of the best ways to get our right brain and our curiosity muscle going again. But it means going to different types of, say, musical events, or sitting in a different cafe in a different part of town where different types of people might be walking through. Maybe it means getting to know an introvert at your company when you're a real extrovert, or getting to know a programmer if you're in marketing. All different types of people can help us understand how others are wired and under other points of view. The next idea I have for us as far as working out our curiosity muscle is to foster risk, innovation, and exploration. And that starts at home, and it can definitely extend to work. So if we're in a team leader capability, are we celebrating when people tried things and failed? Are we celebrating new thought? Are we celebrating, again, the art of exploration? There's a company or an association, nonprofit, called failfest.org. And it's a group of nonprofit executives that came together for an annual meeting to share their stories of failure. Because, talk about resource constrained, they didn't want all these well-minded, well-meaning nonprofits to make the mistakes that they made. So in their abundance and really their generosity of thought, they call these conventions and just share their stories of failure and learning. And actually at failfest.org, there's a template for you to do the same thing. You might think about doing that in your office or in your neighborhood in some way. Learning from each other that trying and failing is not a bad thing. Taking a risk is worth it. Another way to foster curiosity in our lives is to work out that right brain, that creative brain. Author Daniel Pink, I mentioned him earlier, author of A Whole New Mind, talks about ways to get that right brain moving again. It's just a muscle, but it can atrophy if we don't use it. So he talks about things like pattern interrupts, where you might drive a different way to work once a week. How many of you drive to work and you get there and you forget how you even got there? Happens to me about 5 times a week, yeah. So he talks about changing it up, that we need, your brain just tunes out because your brain knows the route and says, okay, you're good, I don't need to be present right now. So he talks about just once a week changing your route. He talks about going to a children's museum for a team meeting so we can have the sense of play again, or visual input that's different from your normal setting. Daniel Pink talks about going to, say, a symphony, where you sit there and you listen to how the instruments interplay with each other. Those and many, many other ideas are in his book about really working out that right brain again and getting that creative muscle. For me, the most powerful way to get creativity back in our lives is just asking more and better questions. That curiosity muscle can work out again if we take time to get to know each other with open open-ended questions instead of closed-ended questions. Tell me more about that. What was that like for you? Or how about when something lousy happens, instead of saying, why did this happen to me, we ask a question like, what does this make possible? Just reframing those questions can bring curiosity back into our daily lives, and your brain will start craving curiosity again, more and more. Of course, this happens with practice, and I am not a pro at this at all, but I want to tell you a story about a recent time where I was able to ask better questions and got to know my mother-in-law in a much better way. So this is my son in the middle here, and my father-in-law, and his wife of 30 years, Brigitta. And Brigitta, when I met her a little over 20 years ago, I learned early that she is the daughter of an SS officer in World War II. And when I first learned that about Brigitta, I didn't take time to ask many more questions. I quickly made my judgment about her and put her in a certain box in my mind and carried on. But it wasn't until about 5 years ago that I had some more one-on-one time with Brigitta and actually started asking her more questions about her own childhood. She was a very young girl at the end of World War II. She never saw her father again. And when the Allies won, she was put into a refugee relocation camp with her older sister. So Brigitta was about 5 and her sister was about 7, and they had a very young mother. And it was a horrible, horrible experience in that camp. She almost died of starvation and illness. They were desperate to stay alive most of the time. And to this day, Brigitta herself feels very ashamed of her upbringing, her affiliation with her dad's SS affiliation and with just being German. But it wasn't until I started asking those questions, really I missed out on at least 10 years of really knowing the true wonderful woman that she is. But I needed to ask better questions instead of just letting my brain make its own decision. So again, another way that we can bring curiosity back into our lives is by understanding hidden bias and educating those around us. Sometimes the first answer is not the best answer, so we need to take a little bit more time to ask better questions. We need to reduce the stigma about hidden bias because we all have it. So I like this quote by Elizabeth Gilbert: if you can let go of your passion and follow your curiosity just might lead you to your passion. So for me, curiosity is a superpower. It makes us smarter. It ignites our brain in a different way. It breaks down walls in this highly fragmented society that we're in. And it brings value to the journey in a world that really values the destination. It can bring us together as humans, and we need that more than ever. I'm going to share with you one of my favorite videos to underscore this point.
It's easy to put people in boxes. There's us, and there's them. The high earners, and those just getting by. Those we trust, and those we try to avoid. There's the new Danes, and those who've always been here. The people from the countryside, and those who've never seen a cow. The religious, and the self-confident. There are those we share something with, and those we don't share anything with.
Velkommen. Jeg kommer til at stille jer nogle spørgsmål i dag. Nogle af dem kan godt være lidt personlige, men jeg håber, I vil svare ærligt på dem. Hvem herinde i rummet var klassens klovn? Hvem er bonusforældre?
And then suddenly, there's us. We who believe in life after death. We who've seen UFOs. and all of us who love to dance. We who've been bullied. And we who've bullied others. And then there's us, the lucky ones who've had sex this past week. We who are broken-hearted. We who are madly in love. We who feel lonely. We who are bisexual. And we who acknowledge the courage of others. We who have found the meaning of life. And we who have saved lives. And then there's all of us who just love Denmark. So maybe there's more that brings us together than we think. TV2 Denmark. All that we share.
Isn't that great? And I believe there is more that brings us together than separates us. And I want to thank you for your time today, and I encourage you to all go out and be the superheroes that you were meant to be. Thanks so much.
Thank you, Annette. Very, very powerful stuff.
Thanks, ML. I love that video. I get teary every time. I've seen it about 10 times.
So we have several questions from the audience. We're still accepting questions through the ISM event app. Use Keynote Q&A from the main menu. Let's start with, what's a good way to start a conversation with someone from another culture or ethnicity? I'm always afraid of asking a stupid question.
I love that. I love that question, and I think vulnerability and just being yourself is a great place to start. And it's really okay to even open it and say, hey, I apologize. I don't know so much about your culture, and I'm curious about X. So maybe X is just talk to me about your education system or how you were raised. Do you have a big family? Right? So talking things that are really simple, but probably relevant to most levels or classes that you might be talking to. But I think just opening up with just that vulnerability is something that brings down defensiveness right away.
So how do you draw a line between curious and nosy?
No, I love that. It's a good question. Comes up every time. And ML mentioned a little bit about emotional intelligence earlier. We have to know when we've crossed that line. And I think what we end up doing is we stop before we even start because of the way we were raised. I was raised in the Midwest. We don't ask a lot of questions. Don't talk unless you're spoken to, sort of thing. And so I was not one who learned this early on. And I think when people realize that your intentions are pure and they're not to pry, that you really do care about them, to care about at least learning about them personally, I think that goes a long way. And you'll just have to follow maybe their visual cues or nonverbal cues as far as when they're done telling you, when they've said enough and they'd rather not go further. So it's a little bit of emotional intelligence. You'll just have to kind of try to read in the other person.
So what makes you curious?
I love finding out what makes people tick and motivates people. So I've been a leader of teams for many, many years. And I think some of my favorite books I've read on leadership, if anyone's read any Marcus Buckingham, I read that early in my career as a leader. But he talks about how we can't take a one-size-fits-all approach to leadership, that we really need to get to know, lean in and get to know people on our teams as individuals. And until they know that we care about them as individuals, they're not going to really care so much about us and working for the company so hard. So what makes me curious is individuals and what motivates them, because everyone is so different. We might think that some people want public accolades, and really others just want more time with their kids and more work-life balance and flexibility. So I like finding that out about people.
So one of the audience members posed this question. I'm in a work environment where your ideas would be dismissed as too touchy-feely.
Yeah.
So how would I implement them in a corporate environment?
So again, I feel your pain. Been in a lot of settings, and one setting I was in was a very traditional financial firm, and it was full with a lot of people that had the right answer, and it was almost like a competition every meeting we were in of who had the right answer, you know, how many MBAs there were in the room. And it takes a little bit of vulnerability and bravery when you're in that setting to say, hey, I actually don't understand that, or I wonder if you can explain that further. So you're almost playing to that person's ego as the subject matter expert by asking them to explain it a little more deeply. But it's okay to raise your hand and be the one that's asking the question, because it's likely there's several others in the room that have the same question. So we have to start somewhere, right? I mean, being a superhero starts with us. And I just want people around me to feel safe, that it's okay to not have all the right answers. But I have to model that as a leader. So it's a tough thing when maybe you're not the team lead. You might have to dance slowly in that environment. But especially if you're a team lead, I think in that setting in particular, it's important for you to model that it's okay to ask questions, to try things, again, take risk, but it has to be modeled by the leader.
So what are some leading indicators that a team may be being impacted by unconscious bias?
Another great question, guys. So I just worked with a company, and I walked in, and it looked like the Stepford Wives. So some of you are my age, you know what I'm talking about. Every single person looked like they were a cheerleader in high school. And I get it. You know, we want to be around sorority sisters or whatever that is, but I challenged them. They were looking to hire someone, and she was about 20 years older than the average person in the company, and they said, oh, she's not a good fit. And her resume was impeccable. And I said, talk to me about that. What does that mean? So I made them actually answer that question, because I think we think that just saying that is okay. Well, that's not a good fit. Well, the person's got to be a good fit. But have someone explain what that is. So I think the first indicator is if you all look and feel the same. If you all have, in fact, diversity is not just about gender or race, but it's also about, it can be about style and personalities. So think about if you're all extroverts on your team. That's not a balanced team. You need someone that's a little quieter, that can give the introvert point of view, because in a world of extroverts, that person's probably getting run over daily. So that's the other way to take a look at it, not just by gender or race, but geez, are we hearing every voice at the table as far as that true diversity?
So this is I think a really common situation that we would find ourselves in as buyers and supply managers. You know, we often ask a lot of questions in our quest to learn and to be better informed. Mm-hmm. Sometimes, though, that can be misinterpreted as confrontational or not acting quickly enough. So how do you suggest we address this sort of misconception?
Okay, so I understand the question. Does that mean it can come across a little cold, like it's purely data-driven? Another great question. I think what I might suggest just quickly is that in your analysis process, you always have some kind of open-ended question where people can give you a little bit of an idea about themselves, you know, or how what's the culture of that company. If you're evaluating a supplier partner, the culture match is important, not only the data, but is they the right person you want to have on your supply chain team? So I would put a chance, whether it's an open-ended box or somewhere in the interview, that you'd give them just a kind of a free-form question and see how they do.
Well, and maybe framing the questions and providing some framing and background, and you know, I'm asking this question so that I can make sure that I provide the most value, that I deliver on what are, you know, your top priorities.
Great idea. Of course, great idea. Really showing your vulnerability on your side, that hey, this is the context, this is why we're asking this next set of questions. Yeah, great idea.
Excellent. So how do you generate curiosity in a meeting in the workplace? We are all in a lot of meetings. So what can we do to infuse them with some curiosity?
Another good question. I don't know if ML's coming up with all these or you guys.
No, they are.
Really great questions.
These are their questions.
I think I have a whole nother session on meetings, believe me. I think that the worst meeting, it's a worst waste of time. If you think about the intellectual power that you have in a meeting, where all of us are sitting in there, the time and the brain power, I think the least effective way to use that time is by saying, what's on everybody's plate, right? Let's go around and talk about what's on everybody's plate. So the way that I would add more curiosity, creativity, collaboration to meetings is come with a problem to solve. Get the what's on your plate thing done via email or some other way that doesn't take collaboration, but use the time together to solve something, to dissect an issue, to ask questions. And that's how I think that just reframing that time together would just be so much more fruitful.
Well, I also liked your statement about instead of saying I can't because, reframing it as I can if, and maybe if we, in our meetings we say, okay, no more can't, but what would we need to do this?
Absolutely.
And that might kind of get curiosity going as well too.
It's powerful, and it becomes infectious because your brain, you get there, you say, okay, we solved that one. Then you get the flywheel going a little bit, well, let's try another one. And take baby steps, maybe solve one big issue 1 year, at one conference or one setting.
So what's the best way to overcome personal or cultural bias when interacting with others?
Self-awareness is a real key to this. Another plug for some training tools on this. Facebook has done a really good video series. It's 4 short videos, free to everybody. If you Google Facebook Managing Bias, it's an internal video series that they did for their employees, but it's really eye-opening. And it talks about everything from handshake bias to how we have bias against people with strong accents, how people with deeper voices get more elected to political office. It's very, very subtle, but they're pervasive. So I think self-awareness it starts with us. It starts with settings like this. Maybe the first time you've ever heard of unconscious bias is today. But now you're going to have it in there, and now you might think about it. And I'll give you another example. This is unscripted here, but I was giving this talk. ML met me a few months ago. I gave the talk on unconscious bias for the diversity conference for ISM. And on my way to that conference, I was in the TSA line behind some people with some very strong accents. And all I could think was that I immediately made a judgment that they didn't travel often. And my second judgment was I was now going to be late in the TSA line. And I thought, and here I am going to give a talk on unconscious bias, and I just did it twice in my own thought. But I think a year ago, I would not have even identified that I was doing that. So it's just an awareness that hopefully you'll see it. It's actually becoming a little more popular. I see a lot of articles about this. You'll start to be a little more aware of it now that you've heard of it.
So you talked earlier about some of the barriers to curiosity, and one of those being that we may not have a boss or supervisor who really gets it or appreciates it. So what are some tools that we can use to influence our bosses who aren't curious or don't seem to value curiosity?
Yeah. And sometimes, just a quick aside, sometimes your boss may not value it because they're afraid of it, right? Because as the boss, they need to have all the answers. So just to have a little empathy for them. And they might be threatened by it, right? If you're too curious, it means that they're not supplying all the knowledge you need as your boss. So I might just bring that into a little bit more of a way for you to get to know them personally, maybe a little bit some conversations where you're getting to know them outside of work, whether it's over coffee or something like that. Or if you really feel a roadblock with your boss, you're not getting anywhere, you're going to need to foster that curiosity elsewhere. So either through a mentoring relationship or other relationships, other people in your company. There's no harm in reaching out to someone in another division and saying, hey, how does this work over there in marketing? And just to do your own kind of research for yourself, your professional development.
So another really great question, one of our audience members says, I find that in meetings, the assumption is that a solution to a problem lies within the group without exploring what others are doing. So what are some approaches that can be taken to look beyond the usual paths for problem solving? I think there's been a lot of articles lately, brainstorming is great for one type of individual. What are some other ways to really get together, solve some problems?
Right. Another good one. Well, I think that as much as we don't want it to be so, I think it's still fairly hierarchical, the way that our American, at least American businesses are set up. So when we get into these team environments, we're going to default to either the top title in the room to frame up the conversation, or maybe the biggest personality, the one that is the leader without having the title. So we can frame that up. I think my solution to that scenario would be empowering other people to present the problem. Because when we say, okay, well, ML's the boss, so she'll solve this for us, or she'll frame up the conversation for us, then I'm taking myself off the hook, right? I don't need to contribute. She's the boss, so she needs to figure it out for us. So collaborating in a way that it's taking every single person on the team or in that setting, giving them an assignment to bring to the table so they all have buy-in that is a truly collective decision. In fact, even taking the boss out of the room might be the best solution sometimes, if your manager can handle that. Because there is, again, a subliminal thing going on there, but if we don't feel safe being truly open and vulnerable with the boss in the room, then we might have to solve that outside of that setting.
Well, I think a lot of leaders are looking for people to demonstrate curiosity. I mean, leaders have to make so many decisions every day, so when you can go to your leader with like, hey, here's the issue, but here's some potential solutions,
Yeah.
I think that's really valued.
I think you're so right. There are more than one right answer. In fact, the higher up you get, again, to have empathy for the leaders in our companies, the higher up you get, the more gray their world is, right? There are so many different sides to an issue. So we as mid-level folks, if we can come with various points of view, it's going to help our leaders make more informed decisions, because they're always having to look out for the what-ifs at that level. So I think you're right. I think leaders are going to notice that in their ranks.
So how do you get past the fear of the unknown that are part of the bias, right? So maybe you're scared of a certain group of people, or the way that people act, or some behavior that you see, and maybe you don't know why, but you just know it sets off as you're paying attention, you know that it sets something off. How do you get past that?
Right. What comes to mind with that question, again, Michael Hyatt, great online leadership expert, michaelhyatt.com. He talks about effective goal setting, and a lot of times we procrastinate or get stuck in our goal setting. In fact, only 7% of people keep their New Year's resolutions every year, because we take too big a pass at goals. We say, I want to write a book this year. I want to overcome my bias this year, right? I want to do, and then by the time March comes around, we haven't done anything with it, so we bag the whole thing. So Michael Hyatt talks about that effective goal setting, and any kind of movement like this can be done with just knowing what the next step is. So it's not that you're going to write a book this year, it's that this week, I'm going to read an article about how to get a book written. Right? So when I think about the bias question, instead of I'm going to overcome my fear of X, just this week, I'm going to ask that person a question. I'm not going to go have dinner with them. I'm just going to ask them one question. Right? So just small baby steps that I think get us a little bit less afraid of inching closer and closer to truly understanding.
So one final question. When you talked about, again, curiosity and some of the barriers, there is that huge fear of failure.
Yeah.
So can you share with us, what was your biggest fail throughout your career? How did you overcome it?
Oh gosh, great question. Well, I was the general manager of a consulting firm, about a 30-person consulting firm, when the economy crashed in 2008, 2009. And we had to close our doors, and we had to basically let 30 people go. So I count that as a failure, because as a general manager, I was in charge of that ship. And it's hard when you're in that situation. How much do you blame on the economy? But again, when you're the captain of the ship, you feel ultimately responsible. So since then, I've gotten my MBA to truly understand some of the financial situations we were facing, and some of the steps we could have made leading up to nobody saw what was really going to happen in 2008, but I think we could have been a little more prudent in how we were running some of our resource management and things like that. So I just vowed that I would never take a title where I was responsible for people like that without being fully equipped, at least confident enough to know to fully understand the financial situation. But that was tough.
Well, I think we learn more from our failures than our successes, right? Because we'll forget our successes, but our failures last.
Yeah.
So if we're learning from them, then I don't view them as failures.
I so agree. And I think if there's one parting message to all of us is that to embrace that we are all works in progress. Right? We need to be lifelong learners, and we need to stay and show our teams that we're lifelong learners and show our kids that we don't have all the answers. And we need to foster that in whatever sphere of influence we have, that it's okay to have some rough edges still, because that's the only way we'll continue to grow as humans.
Well, thank you very much, Annette. What a wonderful, powerful presentation.
Well, thank you all. Thank you all so much. Thanks, Annette.
Thank you. So, thanks again, Annette, for all of your insights, and thank all of you for all of your wonderful questions. So please, just one more round of applause for our keynote speaker, Annette Gregg. And the conference may be ending, but the learning never ends. So we invite you to visit us on the web, use our resources to continue learning throughout the year. And before you go, just one more reminder, please join us next year in Nashville on May 6th through 9th for ISM 2018, and we'll see y'all then. Thank you.